toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Our theme for tonight is the gift of limitation. And when you saw that, you probably thought, what in the world could that mean? Limitation, how could that be a good thing? Well, we're going to do some exploring and discovery. So the Sufis say that creation began because God was a hidden treasure desiring to know and be known, to love and be loved. And in order for this divine desire, this impulse that started the whole creation, and I would say maintains and refreshes the creation, as the Sufis say there's a new creation born in every instant, is this longing for the fulfillment of that desire. So that raises the question, well, we've grown up being taught God is this perfect, complete being. So what could the divine being feel was needed or lacking in order for this desire, this ish? We talk about our ish, but the divine, this was the ultimate ish, this divine longing. What enabled this desire to be realized? Well, what continues to enable it to be realized is the ongoing process of creation. So in Judaism, there's this beautiful description in the Zohar. It says that God hollowed out in the infinite ocean of light, hollowed out a vacuum. And through that vacuum, a shaft of light descended, and that light became the light that formed the basis of existence in every realm, not just this physical realm, but the subtle realms, the angelic realm, the realm of the jinn, and so on. So there needed to be manifestation for this desire to be fulfilled. And we say, well, everything is God, everything is divine. Yes, and we could also say that everything in manifestation by necessity is a limitation of that perfection of the divine being, because without that limitation, you can't have a relationship of infinity with infinity, the infinite with the infinite. You can't have this being in this ocean of light being able to pull out a part of itself and look at the rest of itself to know itself in that way. That's not possible. It can only take place by what we term the returning light, the light that returns from manifestation. So there's the descending light, which enables existence to take place in every realm, but there's also the ongoing returning light. And it's not like light hitting a mirror and just bouncing off and coming back unchanged. In order for that divine purpose to be fulfilled, that light needs to have something embodied in it that wasn't there to start with. Otherwise, same old, nothing is going to result from that. So what is embodied in that light? What's embodied is the wisdom that is gained from the experience of everything in existence, returned to the divine being. So this is a never-ending, ongoing process. So I'm going to be playing my clarinet for the meditation part of our class tonight, but I was just thinking about the instrument itself. If I take the reed off the clarinet and I just blow through the mouthpiece, all you would hear is you just hear the air. You probably wouldn't want to listen to that for hours on end. That's not very interesting. You probably wouldn't want to go to a symphony if that's all you heard was the sound of the breath of the members of the orchestra. So you have to have something that constricts that vibration. In the case of a clarinet, it's the reed. So the reed constricts it, but that's not enough. If I cover up all the holes on the clarinet and blow through it, you get one note, which might be very pretty, but again, you're not going to want to just listen to that one note over and over. Not much interesting is going to take place. So there have to be different stops along the way that cause that vibration to have different aspects of it. And we can think of the subtle realms that the mystics say that our soul not only passed through on its journey to manifestation, but we continue to exist and live in those subtle realms, although normally we're not aware of it. And just like in an atom, if you remember just the basics of chemistry or physics, an atom has different electron orbitals. And the electrons have different energy states in each orbital, but if an electron gets excited, it can move up an orbital, but it doesn't move up in a linear way like you would climb up some stairs. It's either here or it's in that higher state. There's not an in-between. And the same thing in the subtle realms of existence, there's not in-between. There's distinct vibrational levels on which we exist. But again, we're not normally aware of all of those. But we could also say that each of those subtle levels is a constriction of that original light that birthed our soul. Hazrat Inayat Khan says that each of our souls is as a ray emanating from the divine central sun. Each soul is unique, and our consciousness tends to be focalized at different places along that ray, and we identify with it and we think that that's us and everything else is not us. We might give it a name. Well, that's God up there and this is me down here, but actually we're the totality of that ray, but we're only usually normally aware of a part of that ray. So in coming into this existence, there has to be limitation for this relationship with the divine to be established so that the purpose of our existence can be fulfilled. And before we get to the point of being capable for that to take place, we enter, you could say, a deeper form of limitation that isn't meant to be the end point, and we can be stuck there, some people for their whole lives, not realizing there's anything more to themselves and to reality itself than what they're aware of through their physical senses, through their thoughts, through their emotional responses to what happens, and they presume that that's all there is to the world. You know, if I can't see it, if I can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Well, even scientists are now having to acknowledge that there are levels on which we don't have instruments to measure, at least not at present. Perhaps someday we will. There's the mysteries of dark matter and dark energy, and I've talked about William Tiller before, who did research for years and years on subtle energy, which he actually had theories about and ways to measure the effects of subtle energy on, quote, ordinary reality, and it brings about a transformation. But again, usually most people are caught up in the illusory limitation of that frame of reference and thinking that that is all that there is. So that's not what I'm talking about when I say the gift of limitation. That's kind of a stuck point that in the journey of spirituality and awakening, it's necessary to free ourselves from, because otherwise we're caught up in the illusion of duality, that we're separated from everything else. And science has shown that everything on a deep level is interconnected with everything else. We're really not separated from everything else, but in our minds, we assume that we are, and we attempt to understand everything from this frame of reference of separation. So think about light going through a prism. You have white light, you shine it through a prism, and what do you get? You get the beautiful spectrum of all the different colors. Well, you could say that prism brings about a limitation of the original wholeness of that white light, but we're happy for that, because the world would be pretty dull if there weren't all the different colors. So it enables something to take place. So in our traditional ways of thinking about God, usually we've been taught that God knows everything. And of course we can't know everything because we're limited. And sometimes that way of thinking assumes that God knows everything that ever has happened and everything that will ever happen, and that can lead to a very deterministic viewpoint of life, which to me is rather bleak, because if that's the case, why bother? Because it's already mapped out. So think about an artist with tubes of paint of all the primary colors. And with those colors, you can mix any color that you like. Diane knows a lot more about that than I do, how to do that, but anyway. And you might say that, well, there is, although we can't perceive it, you could say in some space there are all the paintings that could ever be. Because you could take every possible combination of those colors and every possible brushstroke that you could make with those colors in an infinitely vast space, and there would be every painting that could ever be. Well, theoretically you could say that, but then you could go, well, could that ever be realized? Well, for one, there's so many possibilities that before that could possibly happen, the last proton would decay into subatomic particles. The universe could not exist that long, and no conceivable universe could exist that long. And the way I was referring to the divine being not being able to step back in that infinite state with a part of itself and look at all the rest of it, that doesn't make any sense either. God knows him, herself, through what's gained through the experience of beings in life. And so all those potential paintings, you could say, well, theoretically, they're all out there, but there really isn't a there that's accessible. They have to be created. They're brought into existence by the artist in relationship with their intuition and their inspiration and so on. And then we could do a segue into different musical notes. And then we could even get into, well, in Indian music, they don't have the same steps and notes that we do. There's a lot more. There's a lot of in-between notes that we don't have. But just take Western music and the notes that we have. So you could say that somewhere you could imagine there's every symphony that could ever be composed by the combinations of all those notes. But again, that's nothing that could ever be realized. It has to be something that's brought into manifestation. And in Judaism and the Kabbalah and the mysticism of the Kabbalah, they talk about there's 4 realms. There's the beyond, can't really talk about it, and then I don't remember what the second one is, but the third one is the realm of conception of possibility. So it's like the visualization of things that could be but haven't come into manifestation. And the 4th realm is what's brought into manifestation here. Well, all 4 of those have to be gone through for there to be something produced that can exist in manifestation that again returns the light back to the divine, and now something is gained that wasn't there before. Okay? Now let's step back once more. And think about the elements in chemistry. Well, the elements contain the possibilities of all the ways you could combine them and all the materials that you could create and so on. But let's think of the divine qualities as like elements in a sense. Imagine you could make a periodic table of the elements and you could group ones together. And people have done systems like this. All the ones that are related to, like, you probably put love and compassion and so on together. You probably put divine seeing and divine hearing together and so on. So all of those are different ways that the divine can be experienced. Aspects of the divine being can be experienced in life, but could they be experienced if there's no experiencer? So think about sacredness. Well, what in the world does sacredness mean if there's not a perceiver of that sacredness? Okay, so you could say that the qualities come into actualization by means of a relationship with a being in manifestation, experiencing whatever they're in relationship with through that particular quality. And it could be beauty, it could be compassion, it could be harmony, and so on. And now that quality has come to life in a way that's unique to the experience of each person. We all could try to give a description of what beauty means, but each of us has a different experience of beauty. And the same thing with the rest of the qualities. And as we've talked about before many times in previous classes, instead of thinking that the divine qualities are these unchanging archetypes sitting somewhere, like the Platonic ideals of roundness and rosiness and so on, we could think that every time we experience one of these qualities, something from the light of our being and the experience of our being through that quality is not only transforming us and not only transforming what we are experiencing, but is actually bringing about a transformation of the quality itself. And so now the divine being has a new way of understanding his or her own beauty through that. Okay? And once again, that couldn't happen unless there was the limitation of being in this human form with the finite lifespan and the finite capacity for things that we can experience and know and so on. But the possibilities that can arise for that are beyond description. And so we could say that we are fulfilling our own unique divine purpose by our very way of experiencing these divine qualities in the midst of life. So put that on. So we work, many of us work with practices, the sacred names of God, and Sufis call them waza-i. But whether we have a specific practice like that or whether we just focus on one, again, it's not just something that we might think that quality is doing to us. Again, that's a linear, separated way of thinking, but we're engaged in this intertwined relationship where we're transformed and the quality is transformed, and what we're experiencing is also transformed by means of what's going on. And so the fruits of our experiences in life are our gift to the divine being. We could think in the transcendent sense, but also in the manifest sense, because everything that we're experiencing is an aspect of the divine being itself, and so it's a gift to what we're experiencing, and conversely, whatever we're experiencing has its own divine gift that is returned to us through that experience. And so if we step into that and start to experience life in that way, things become so much richer. So I'd like to read you a few things from Hazrat Inayat Khan. The knower manifested as the human in order that he or she might become known to him herself. And now, what may the human do in order to help the knower fulfill this purpose? Seek continually an answer to every question that arises in their heart. That's a good assignment. God discovers God's perfection in our limitation. Therefore, the soul may be considered to be a condition of God, a condition which makes the only being limited for a time. The one who is conscious of their earthly origin is an earthly human. One who is conscious of their heavenly origin is the son or daughter of God. And I love this one. It is owing to our limitation that we cannot see the whole being of God. We can't take in the infinite all at once. But all that we love and admire belongs to the beauty, that beauty beloved by all. God knows him herself by her manifestation. Manifestation is the self of God, but a self which is limited, a self which makes God know that God is perfect when God compares God's own being with this limited self, which we call nature. Therefore, the purpose of the whole creation is the realization that God gains by discovering God's own perfection through God's manifestation. In this sense, our human limitation is not a defect, but a necessary veil that allows for the play of self-discovery, both for the soul and reflectively for the divine. If we were all born perfect, there would be no purpose in human life. The purpose of life is that we grow towards perfection. From the greatest limitation, we grow towards perfection. Its beauty is in acquiring wisdom, in living at the cost of all our failures, our mistakes. It is all worthwhile, and it all accomplishes the purpose of our coming to the earth. At the cost of happiness of heaven, the soul comes to the great fulfillment of life, which even angels are not blessed with. For manifestation in human form is the utmost boundary of manifestation, the furthest that any soul can go. The experience of contrast between our limited self and the unlimited God is what truly awakens the soul. The moment the soul compares its own limitation with the perfection of God, it has begun to progress. So we see that what appears as limitation from one perspective, from another, is the very condition that allows for the manifestation of divine qualities and the grand realization of God's perfection. It is by navigating the intricacies of this limited existence that the soul, a spark of the divine, unfolds its true nature, becoming an engineer of its destiny rather than merely a machine. This grand journey with all its challenges contributes to the symphony of divine manifestation. So there's nothing wasted in our experiences. It's all something that is returned in the light that comes back to the divine And it's not just, I mean, as if that weren't enough, giving this gift to the divine, the wisdom that's again accrued through our life's experiences, that's beautiful. It's helping the divine to fulfill that desire to know him herself. But that's not the end of the story. It's the coming together and the interplay of these two lights, the light that descends from the transcendent and the light that returns in what we've talked about before, the barzakh, which is like the meeting place. It's the in-between of the manifest and the transcendent. In that meeting place, something is born anew. And this is what the seed that blossoms in the new creation that takes place in every instant. It cannot blossom just from what we think of as the divine end. So it's not like the divine can go, okay, that was nice, here, let's pass this new creation here and that creation there. The new creation can only take place by virtue of what's accrued by the relationship of both sides. So we are a necessary part of the evolution of the awakening of divinity in life. And that's what Hazrat Inayat Khan said was the purpose of the message. The message is helping to foster the awakening of humanity to its own divinity and what that means. And it isn't, okay, this being awakens to his or her divinity, well, that's good, but the totality is awakening to itself. And at first we think of it as our own individual journey, which in one sense it is, but in another sense, we're on the never-ending cosmic journey of all beings are participating in this journey of unfoldment. So we're not doing this solely for our benefit, although what we think of as us certainly gains a great deal of benefit, but it's a benefit to all of existence. So here we have the notion in Buddhism of the bodhisattva. So the Buddhists aspire to nirvana, beyond anything that you can say anything about, beyond desire, beyond conditioning. But some Buddhists say, well, I'm going to take the vow of the bodhisattva. I will not accept final nirvana until all sentient beings achieve nirvana. And because there's no end to new creation, that's never going to happen. Well, you might think, oh, bummer, what have they signed themselves up for? Actually, what they've signed themselves up for is fully engaging in the never-ending process, which is the reason why there's life in the first place, which is pretty cool. So there's no end to that. And we could say awakening is, first of all, realizing that we're not separated. Secondly, realizing that each of us is unique and each of us has a unique part to play in this process. And thirdly, that we have a way of engaging in this process that furthers the purpose of existence. And it's not that we're just this empty channel, okay, I'm going to get out of the way and let all this come through me and see what happens. It's our own desires, our deep desires of our heart that are actually the fuel and the means of navigation into what's emerging in the future, what we have to contribute. So I think I've used this terminology before, but to me this is where karma, which is usually thought of as just having to deal with the fruits of past actions, good or bad, but that's a Newtonian view of spirituality, causality based. You've got to burn your karma and then you can be free. But instead of that, we can think of there has to be imperfection for there to be life. There has to be limitation for there to be life. There has to be limitation for the divine purpose to be fulfilled. And instead of thinking of karma in this old way, we can think of that each of us has a role to play in the opening up of old patterns that were sticking points that kept this furtherance of this process from taking place. So it's not we're having to pay back for what we did. It's like we each have a role to play in how we awaken to how we can engage in a relationship with whatever it is that we are experiencing. And here's where the qualities can come through that help to open up the situation. I've said many times that everything is a portal, an opening to the sacred, if we can be in a proper relationship with it. So we're engaging in this, and then karma literally means action. So yes, it's the action, but it's the way of action. The central message of the Bhagavad Gita is don't be attached to the fruits of your actions, act for the sake of acting. And what this means is it's like being in that, I think of it as like riding the crest of the wave, like a surfer is going to do. That you're in Taoism would be called being in tune with the Tao, or in Western terms, like being with the flow of things, being in that state of naturalness of being that enables this process to continue, not being in this separated dualistic state of consciousness, but on the other hand, not remaining in a merged state of consciousness, which is wonderful to be in for a while. And there was a period in Pir Vilayat's teachings that went on for quite some time when he was really into samadhi, which is a wonderful, blissful state. But then he realized, well, this isn't really what it's all about. This is an aspect of the possibilities of our consciousness. But just like my example with the clarinet, we don't want to just hear this one note. We don't want to just stay on this merged state where it's not possible for us to engage in this dynamic process of fulfillment for the reason why we're here. Okay. So take a breath, and let me read you another little bit. Oh. Karma becomes dharma when our actions are not merely consequences, but expressions of a conscientious and evolving heart. The one who is not conscientious in their obligations in life toward everything they come in contact with is indeed irreligious. Conversely, the one who proves trustworthy to every soul they meet and considers their relationships and connections, small or great, as something sacred, certainly observes the spiritual law of that religion, which is the religion of all religions. This is the living of religion, the active embodiment of Dharma in every deed. So we've talked about presence many times in previous classes, and as I was preparing for this class, I was thinking, well, in a sense, you could say presence is a limitation of consciousness. That sounds kind of strange. Limitation in the sense of, when we're not present, where's our consciousness oftentimes all over the place? We're thinking about yesterday, tomorrow, all kinds of random thoughts. But when we're really present, we're really engaged in what we're experiencing. So just like the example of the prism, or the example of a laser, which is a coherent frequency of light that can be used in exploration, can be used in healing, in medicine, and so on. You could say, well, the laser is limiting that light. Yes, but for a wonderful purpose. Now you have something that's possible with that light that wasn't possible before. In a sense, with the old receivers, where you had to turn the dial to get to the radio station you wanted, what would you get if you weren't right on that station? A bunch of static, right? So you could say, well, gee, when I get to the right station, I've really limited all the frequencies that are being broadcast. Oh, I'm not being very nice to those frequencies. Well, you're wanting clarity. Well, of course you want to. You just want to tune in to this. So it's a limitation in the service of something that has a purpose. So limitation is not necessarily something that we don't want to have. If we didn't have the limitation of our skin, well, for one, it'd be pretty messy, right? Okay. So I'd like for us to briefly do a practice. And this is a combination of 3 different wazaif. And you don't have to take these with you. You can work with them some if you want, but this is just really meant for right here. So the first one is Qabid, Q-A-B-I-D, is the divine name that means constriction. And for a long time when I first came across this term, I go, I don't want to work with that one. Because there's some qualities you look at and they don't sound very attractive. But to me, this is a very important quality. So as we do this, think of Qabid in that sense of honing in on that crystalline clarity, which is the second part of this, which is Mubin, M-U-B-I-N, which means clarity. So you're bringing it into focus, just like the radio station, just tuning it in real good. And then the third part, and I'll say these again, is Basit, B-A-S-I-T, which means expansion. So paradoxically, you started with constriction and focalization, but now something has opened up that wasn't there before, and there's many more possibilities and degrees of freedom than there were to start with. So once again, as when we work with the divine name, we invoke it by saying Ya, Y-A, O, Qabid, O divine constriction, Ya Mubin, O divine clarity, Ya Basit, O divine expansion, expansiveness. So I'll do this a few times, and we're just going to do this 11 times together, the triplet, but let me do it a few times first. And then join in. Once again, Qabid, Mubin, Basit. Ya Qabid, Ya Mubin, Ya Basit, Ya Qabid, Ya Mubin, Ya Basit. Join with me. Ya Qabid, Ya Mubin, Ya Basit, 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 Ya Qabid, Ya Mubin, Ya Basit. Once more. Ya Qabid, Ya Mubin, Ya Basit. And then silently on the breath, without thinking of the Ya, as you inhale, think Qabid. And on the turnaround of the breath, think Mubin, bringing things into clarity. And on the exhalation, think Basit, expansiveness. So breathe in Qabid, Don't hold your breath, just on the turnaround of the breath, Mubin, exhale, Basit at your own rate. And just experience the feeling without the words. And now I'm going to play some music on my clarinet. And as you listen, just open to this experience and feeling yourself as enabling a crystallization and a transformation of light that's helping in this never-ending process of birthing something in the new creation that can only come through you, through your way of sampling and experiencing any of the divine qualities, especially what's being called for in any circumstance. Have I not come to this world of limitation in search of thee? Have I not followed thy footprints on this earth? Have I not looked for thy light in the heavens? But where did I find thee, beloved, at last? Hiding in my heart. Amen.